Episode 69 of Strange Bräu Radio. I'm your host again, Tobe Johnson, and it is quarantine time still here in America. Waking up later and later. My goodness, that's not a good sign. Today, we have a podcast from a voice that you may know, Lon Strickler of Phantoms and Monsters, and we will be talking flying humanoids and much, much more. So stay tuned for Lon Strickler in a minute. But first, thank you to all those Patreon sponsors out there. Patreon.com/Strange Bräu Radio. Remember, without your patronage on Patreon, we just can't keep things going here, especially nowadays, my goodness. So I appreciate everybody who's a member. Patreon.com/Strange Bräu Radio. Rate, review, and do those little 5-star thingies on iTunes. Okay, we'll be right back, and I'll tell you more about Lon Strickler. And before we get to our guest, Lon Strickler, let me tell you about some upcoming dates. Write these babies down. April 18th and 19th. That's a week. Well, roughly a week from today. Saturday, April 18th. Go to strangebräuradio.com, click on the quarantine webinars, and get a free ticket, suggested donation of $4.99 to Mystery of the Elongated Skulls with researcher Brien Foerster and repatriation artist Marcia K. Moore. On there, I would appreciate it, Marcia would appreciate if you donated to Marcia's PayPal account for $4.99. However, the tickets are free. So if you can't afford to go, you're in the middle of a bind, I want to offer that to you. But if you can pitch in $4.99, that helps not only the show, but it helps out Marcia as well. As an artist, you can imagine, very difficult at this point. And again, Brien Foerster, you can find him all over the internet about megalithic, ancient tech, we'll call it, especially in South America and places like Pumapunku, and also the Elongated Skulls, a researcher that looked into these things with Marcia K. Moore, who's a repatriation artist. That's what the title is, for looking in and reconstructing what these people must have looked like who had these long heads. So we're going to talk 3 hours about that. That's Saturday, the April 18th, from 1 to 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. This is a full webinar, full presentation, full Q&A. You got to have a registration at least, if not a $4.99 suggested donation ticket to get it. And so you go to strangebräuradio.com, click on the quarantine webinars, and once you're inside the webinar link, you'll see the previous events we've done and the current ones. This is the Mystery of the Elongated Skulls. Click on that. It will give you instructions. Very easy. It's just a click away. You write your name and you get a reservation. Most everyone has a PayPal account, so Marcia K. Moore's PayPal account is within that text body as well. Also, the next day, on the 19th, you could order 2 tickets while you're at strangebräuradio.com. And the 19th, 1 to 4 p.m., again, Pacific Standard Time, the Quantum Bigfoot Language with Ron Morehead and Scott Nelson. Full presentations, full discussion, totally immersive, but you have to be there. Tickets after, right now they're $4.99 when I recorded this. After Sunday the 12th of April, they're going to go up to $6.99. So if you want a ticket, you got to order it pronto. Well, by the time you hear this, they'll be $6.99. So get your ticket at strangebräuradio.com, and there you will have the invite code as well. And again, these are underneath the quarantine webinar. That is 1 to 4 p.m. on April 19th, Sunday, April 19th, 1 to 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Ron Morehead and Scott R. Nelson, Navy Crypto-Linguist. All right, next up we have Lon Strickler of Arcane Radio, Phantoms and Monsters, and his latest book, Flying Humanoids. So we go there. We definitely start off with winged creatures and discuss not only anecdotal stories in his book, but some personal encounter stuff too. So my conversation now with podcaster, author, and internet dominator, Lon Strickler. All right, here we go. All right, I am here with Lon Strickler, Phantom Monsters, and as well Arcane Radio, the host of Arcane Radio. How are you doing, Lon?
I'm doing fine.
Good to have you on here. So, Lon, there's obviously a lot going on in the world, and you're paying attention to it. I'm paying attention to it, and I want to ask you, first of all, someone who has the pulse of the paranormal, whether or not you've noticed an uptick in paranormal phenomena since the COVID outbreak.
Not really. It's probably diminished a bit as opposed to before.
Okay.
I think there's less people out there roaming around looking for things, so or seeing things. So, yeah, it's kind of dropped off a bit.
Okay. All right. And what's your average call-in rate or audience participation rate? Are people pretty responsive to you and your show and getting back to you with things all across the globe?
Well, it doesn't really center much around the show. It centers around the blog itself, phantomsandmonsters.com. And I have a team, the Phantoms and Monsters 14 research team. We have 19 members, and they are spread around North America. And when we do get a call or an email or something we need to check up on, if I can get somebody out there, I will send them out. But normally, it's a report that'll come in that we will look into, get as much information about it, and then we'll report it eventually on the blog itself.
Okay. Let's describe the latest team member research expedition and the circumstances around it. I'm curious about what's coming in.
Well, most recently, it's been what's been going on in Chicago, which has really been going on for the last 3 years, which is the Chicago area, Lake Michigan, Mothman or winged humanoid encounters that people have been experiencing. And we've basically taken the lead on that. We have most of the sighting reports coming into us. But more recently, since the beginning of October, the O'Hara International Airport and the Rosemont neighborhood have been kind of point zero for activity. There's been a lot of activity on the airport property itself. And we have been receiving reports from security guards, TSA guards, and people that live around the airport.
Okay. So are they having first-hand sightings, close-up sightings? What are we talking about?
Oh, yeah. They're actually having encounters with these things. They have seen it. In fact, one of our investigators was out there about a month ago and had an encounter as well. He works for a trucking company, and he's got the permission to go into several of the cargo areas. And he, one morning, he saw one of these things flying about also. So,
okay.
Yeah, I mean, and more recently, we had a security guard who had seen one along the fence line going over to the tarmac off one of the cargo areas. And he initially thought it was someone who was, just getting on the property, watching planes, or actually investigating this phenomena. And more recently, they have been escorting people off the property because of this. The management at O'Hara is very aware of what's been going on. I've been getting reports from people who work for different parts of different companies located at O'Hara, and they've been told point blank not to participate. But luckily, some people are brave enough to come forward and telling us what's been going on.
So why do you think that area? What is it? What is unique about O'Hara? Because there's UFO flaps over there. What's going on in that area? What do you think, Lon?
I don't know. I don't know if it's just because of the activity of the airplanes and all the the hustle and bustle. I don't know. I don't know what it is. It's interesting. is something we've been trying to figure out. Well, it's something we're trying to figure out all along around the whole area. And, to this point, we don't really have any concrete answers. Just speculation. One thing we do believe that it's not an indigenous being. We do believe it's flesh and blood, but it's coming into our reality somehow. Is it interdimensional? Has it been summoned somehow? It's an enigma, and we've been looking into it intensely, taking every clue we can get.
Right. Now, someone like John Keel, looking at the Mothman prophecies, ends up starting one place and ends an altogether different place at the end of his story. His opinion changed diversely. Tell us a little bit about your story, Lon, and how this started for you and where you ended up treating the paranormal.
Well, I've been involved with the paranormal since the late 70s. I've, that was a time when you told somebody you were a paranormal investigator, they kind of looked at you funny. And, most of what I did was kind of done by word of mouth, but I am somewhat of an intuitive. And I used to spend a lot of time on the Gettysburg battlefield when I was a kid. And I had something happen one day when I was 8 years old where I actually, it's just like, it was like the perfect storm had happened. It seemed like all of a sudden I started hearing the battle itself, seeing apparitions, smelling gunfire. All my senses were heightened. And this lasted for about a half a minute, then it just completely ended. So that's where it actually began at. I had when I moved down to Maryland, I had an encounter with a Bigfoot in May of 1981 near Sykesville, Maryland. And I kind of got into the cryptids after that. I really wasn't aware of Bigfoot at the time, though I knew about it. The legend of Boggy Creek was the big deal back then. And I had not really known too much about the phenomena. But when I did have the encounter, then, my eyes were kind of opened up. And then I had an encounter in 1988 with two other gentlemen here in Pennsylvania at a Boy Scout camp. And the scouts were complaining and talking about screaming, a sound of a child screaming, all kinds of strange, weird sounds coming out of the woods, particularly at night. And they'd be leaving the campsites early. So I was asked to go out and investigate. And we had an encounter with a winged being with red eyes. I had been aware of the Mothman phenomenon in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, but what we saw that night, I don't know if it was the same thing, but it actually mimicked to a degree of what's been going on in Chicago.
Describe this winged being here. I'm curious. I haven't seen something like this.
It was about 5 to 6 foot in height. And this is is the same what's been going on out in Chicago area. It's dark in colored, 5 to 6 foot in height. It's got the red eyes. We didn't get a real good look at it because it literally jettisoned itself into the air. It was standing in the creek. This is the same phenomenon we're hearing now. Occasionally, the wings, people will see the wings open up, but the wings themselves, for the most part, are kind of gargoyle, bat-like in structure, anywhere from 10 to 15 foot in width. And the body itself is real dark, usually black in color, very thin, like it's emaciated if it'd be a human with a small head. And there are a few small variations between sightings, but, basically that's what people have been seeing.
Well, now you mentioned Bigfoot, you mentioned winged humanoids. There's some interesting reports of, bat squatch, winged humanoid Sasquatch things. Have you ever taken a report on something like that?
Yeah, we had something going on out in Woodstock, Illinois. winter before last, there were some sightings of what someone described as an actual Bigfoot with wings. We had 3 reports out of Woodstock, Illinois, and in fact, one of my investigators, Tobias Whalen, he took a report from a gentleman who made a report with the local police department. Then he filed a FOIA, and we received the report. So yeah, it was an actual sighting that was investigated by the police. Now I don't know what this thing was,
right?
But the description, and in my book, my new book, I have a sketch of this thing, and it looks like a Bigfoot with wings on its back.
Mm-hmm. What is too much for you to believe in or look at, Lon? You know, there's pretty much every variant, every description of something hybrid going on here. Is there any creature in particular that you just can't wrap your mind around and say, I don't think so?
I don't know. You know, I've been doing this so long. I agree that some of it's pretty out there, but you know, I do take people at their word for the most part until I prove otherwise. Some of the things that have been reported to us over the year are very hard to believe. Mm-hmm. But then you'll have somebody follow it up and say they've seen the same thing. Mm-hmm. Very credible people, even police officers. I mean, you know, this phenomenon in Chicago has been seen by police officers also, and they have come forward and told us about it.
Going with winged humanoids still, is this something you can go back through time and find cave paintings from, or Renaissance paintings? I mean, we have angels, we have winged humanoids there, but I mean, we have demons, winged humanoids there. Is it, looking through, paintings and cultural significant items like that, do we see representations throughout culture of winged humanoids throughout all history?
I think those representations would match what people have been seeing. It's interesting when you back in history and hear about any type of phenomena or any type of being. There's usually some type of legend or fable attached to it, and they try to put it into the mainstream like angels or demons and such. And I think people pretty well have been seeing the same thing over the years. And, because of the world we're in and, it's taken more literal as opposed to being associated with something else. I think it may very well be the same type of being.
Yeah, no, it's something that has not made its way to the West Coast readily. I mean, we don't get a lot of reports of things like that. It's a lot of Bigfoot country out here in the West Coast. So maybe,
well, you'd be surprised. I mean, I have gotten reports of winged humanoids in the West Coast, up and down the West Coast, actually. So I guess you have to read the book. Right. I've got some in there.
Yeah. Okay. So you got some casework from the West Coast.
Yeah.
Okay. And some of the other interesting things as far as humanoids in flight are these what look like men in jetpacks that people have videos. You know, they almost look like little astronauts flying around the mesa. You have any casework of what I'm talking about?
Well, the thing that closely resembles that is a phenomenon that occurred down in Mexico about a decade ago, which people were calling the flying witches. They kind of did look like they were some type of humanoid that was flying around on some type of mechanical pack or something like that. And in fact, there was an encounter not far from Monterey. Ken Gerhardt, actually, the cryptozoologist, actually looked into a lot of this. He went down there. He still has no explanation as to what it was. These flying humanoids, and you talked about men in packs or something like that. That's kind of unusual. I don't know of anything specific that would come in that category. Most of what I run into are beings with some type of propulsion or wings.
Right. So one of the things that we talk about on the show is this paranormal potpourri that develops in certain areas, these places where the veil is thin. Chicago could be one of these areas. Mexico that you described could be one of these areas. Do you believe that there are these hot spots where entry and exit points exist all around the globe for supernatural entities?
Oh, yeah, definitely. In particular, here in Pennsylvania, there are some spots, particularly the Chestnut Ridge area in western Pennsylvania. Yeah, excuse me, my throat's a little dry. Around the San Antonio.
You better check your temperature, Lon.
Yeah,
come on.
No, I'm fine there.
All right.
And San Antonio south into the Rio Grande area, that area down in there, particularly Four Corners of New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, and Utah. There are a lot of hot spots. There are a lot of areas where we do get a lot of different types of reports. Northern Illinois, I mean, traditionally has been a hot spot for winged cryptids, thunderbirds, pterosaurs, now with these winged humanoids. So, yeah, I mean, there are hot spots.
Absolutely, there are. Going back to Four Corners, I know the work of J.C. Johnson, a little bit about what happened down there in Four Corners. It seemed like a pretty active area, and J.C. was busy chronicling that as often as he could. Tell us about the reports coming out of the Four Corners and what you've heard.
Well, it's mostly what J.C. has investigated. And in fact, my new book's dedicated to J.C. I chronicled a lot of his work since 2010, and while he was living in that area, and he has it kind of runs the gamut. I mean, he did a lot of Bigfoot research down there. The furry ones, what they're referred to by the Navajo. These type of winged humanoids that people said looked like the Jeepers Creepers being, that has been seen. And of course, with the skinwalkers, he did do a video about skinwalkers about a decade ago, and his association with the reservation police and their investigations and encounters over the years. So there was a lot going on down there. It really was. And I would just love to be able to go back down there, and to do some investigation. And then, in fact, one of the gentlemen used to work with JC is in the group, and I have another guy who's most likely going to join the group as well. So, yeah, we're keeping tabs on what goes on down there.
Let's talk about art imitating life. That's an interesting place to go. You mentioned a winged creature looking like something out of a horror movie, Jeepers Creepers.
Yeah.
You see this time and time again, Lon, where art imitates life, and it's in that order, to be frank. What do you think's going on there as far as like a collective subconscious? Do you think that people know something that they're slowly bleeding out? What do you think?
I think in this case, and in my first book, Mothman Dynasty, the Jeepers Creepers reference was made a lot to these beings. I just think most people feel that they need to associate it with something that others were familiar with. And of course, that's kind of like the first thing that came to people's mind when they saw these things. And, I'll be honest with you, I think I probably got that reference with like a quarter of the sightings.
Right. It just makes you wonder where they come up with these designs. You hear the Predator thing over and over again.
The Glimmer Man. Yeah. We do. And, it makes you want to think, did the originators of these characters actually have an experience at some point? I think that's very possible.
Mm-hmm. Well, you can't, and you mentioned Skinwalker, and of course, Skinwalker Ranch is on the tip of everybody's tongue. As far as Skinwalker being a unique place. I think it's unique because of what happened there as far as the research. But in general, would you agree that a place like Skinwalker Ranch isn't rare, that these exist all over the globe at the same, quantity of experiences?
Oh, I believe so. I think the Skinwalker Ranch in particular is well known for, actually there was a lot of activity seen by the original owners, and it goes back to the indigenous tribes, the Utes, who legendarily did not go on that property. They they avoided it. So, and people knew about that. So that area has been known about for a while. But there are other places in other areas that are the same way. I mean, I was speaking about the Navajo in the Four Corners area. There are places on their reservations that they don't tread on either. And of course, the Skinwalker phenomena, which is basically a witch that kind of transforms or shapeshifts into whatever type of being they want, is the younger generation will talk about it, but very rarely will the older generation get into the subject with you.
Mm-hmm. A place like Skinwalker Ranch, have you ever been to a hotbed like that before? A place that you'd say is just, over the top supernatural, and where would that be for you?
Well, I haven't personally, though. There's an area in Pennsylvania I mentioned earlier, the Chestnut Ridge. There seems to be a lot of weird phenomena and high strangeness along that ridge line, which extends from Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania, south into West Virginia. It's about 100-mile length of ridge line, but there's a lot of strange things that have been going on there for years. Stan Gordon has documented the activity for almost 50 years now.
Well, when you describe these entities, the variant of different entities, the paranormal potpourri, if you will, when you're looking at something like this, I'm reminded of Timothy Renner talking about the Plaid Man. Now he gets all these reports of a Plaid Man. What do you think of us creating a thought form? Do you think that's a possibility that we slowly, the more we talk about an entity, it generates it and boosts it, and more sightings develop?
I think if the energy is there, if someone can use their subconscious mind to create this type of entity, I think it's entirely possible. Basically, a poltergeist is a thought form. It's something that is generated by the mind unconsciously of an individual, and it becomes a life of its own, basically. And this phenomenon has been proven in the past. So when you get into the cryptid world, like with Slender Man and the Plaid Man and other beings, it very well could be a thought form. Tim is in my group, and we live very near each other. And, I'm very familiar with what he's been involved with over the years. And I think he and I kind of are on the same level as far as thinking that this very well could be a thought form, because he has his research area has produced a lot of strange manifestations.
Right. And I've hinted at this before, maybe explained it a little bit to the audience, but Tim and I, we did a private experiment where we would send gifts to one another. Now, these were supernatural gifts that were given to us, me on the West Coast, him on the East Coast. And then we would mail these and leave them out in, different spots. I'd get his stuff and leave them out here. And the idea was to see if there is any kind of, similarity with time and place and how things move. The hope is that there would be a similarity at time and place, and maybe, just maybe, the objects would go home. And although we were never able to produce that, we were able to get things to move at the same time, similar objects and stuff like that. So my question is to you is, have you ever got gifts like this before, Lon? Things left out for you in areas that you visit, your personal research area?
I think that does happen to most investigators. Even if they realize it or not, there do seem at times things that seem to be left. I have been, when I used to get out a lot and do research, there'd be times when you would see something that would be kind of just sitting out of the ordinary, why it got there, it's hard to describe. It's hard to, believe. I think it's entirely possible. It's this whole servitor thought form phenomena in theory. I don't think we truly understand it yet, but I think the human mind is capable of producing varying levels of energy that can actually manifest into something that, that does cause some problems.
Well, what's your opinion of getting something left behind for you? Is that something that you'd take home with you, or how would you treat that?
Well, I guess it depends what it was. But I probably normally wouldn't. I'd leave it there and then come back and see if it remained there. That you can get into a lot of different aspects of the paranormal and supernatural when things like that start to happen. I mean, is it something involving the occult? Is it something involving interdimensional beings, or can it simply be a thought form manifestation or something left by something you may have created yourself? I don't know.
Right. No, it's a deep hole to go down to, of course. But what I'm going to ask you about your other book, your Alien Disclosure. I mean, we're at the wide spectrum of disclosure and the brink of a national tragedy going on here, a global tragedy or epidemic, and yet we have alien disclosure just kind of waning its existence here, unfortunately. What do you think about what's going on as far as disclosure and everything with the USS Nimitz?
I kind of believe, for the most part, we're being spoon-fed this information. This is something that's been going on for a long, long time. And the fact that this particular incident has been presented to the public the way it has, it kind of makes you wonder why they are actually coming forward with it. Is there something else, bigger coming down the road? They also talked about some of the incidents off the East Coast, as far as these craft being seen and following and sorties and such.
Right.
As far as aliens and extraterrestrials, I kind of rely a lot on witnesses, on experiencers, and on their reports, their encounters, and I have heard a lot of them over the years. I mean, there is just a lot of it out there. There have been individuals I have worked with, though briefly, who have just disappeared and never come back. I have been working with a gentleman by the name of David Eckhart, who will be on my show again this Friday night, who has had a long relationship with extraterrestrials or EBEs that come into his home. He has, for the better part, tried to photograph a lot of this, a lot of these beings. His saga's been going on for almost 15 years. It started out initially him being abducted, as well as his family. He suffered from rheumatoid arthritis. They cured him of that. He seemed to be singled out for some reason. He still doesn't understand it, why they had singled him out from the very beginning. And the types of entities that he has encountered over those years has changed. And in fact, for the most part now, a lot of these entities are more humanoid. And when I say humanoid, I'm talking more human-like as opposed to what the other ones were. And but it does change, and their activity changes, the routine changes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he can come home from work and he doesn't know what to expect, because there's a lot of things that happen. Why these portals open up on his property, and he has moved also, so it's kind of followed him about. Is there something about him that intrigues them that they continually, come in and check up on him? It's bizarre, and I'm not the only person. Many people in his family and friends he has have witnessed this as well. It's pretty astounding.
Well, yeah. So have you worked with witnesses up close and personal as, a host, a researcher, someone who writes about this, someone who's been abducted, had implants, and, kind of followed their case?
Yeah, there have been many of them over the years. I'm also an experiencer. I had, and I think a lot of it was tied into David. I think after I got involved with his case in 2010, of course, they knew I was, and they told him, they knew I was helping him try to understand what had been going on, and that I was chronicling his his encounters, and they basically gave him permission to let me help him. I don't think David would have worked with me if he wasn't given permission to do so. I mean, that's how intense this has gotten. And in fact, in 2015, my wife contracted cancer, and that year while she was sick before she passed, I had several encounters with these tall whites, these tall grays. There's been two different types that have actually come into my residence. Mm. And in one occasion, I was abducted, but I was taken to a location where I was shown various things about the past, and it was almost like they wanted me to understand the history of what the human ET relationship was. And I was shown various scenarios, but after that occurred, I haven't had any instances with them since. So it's been maybe about 4 years.
So no missing time, nothing like that.
Not that I can really tell. These all happened at night. I would be suddenly woken by these things standing over me, and it was always three of them. That happened twice. Then the second, and in the time when they took me, I just ended up at this location, where they showed me what was going on, and or what they wanted me to see. And when I did return, it's almost like I just woke up. It wasn't a dream. I had physical, let's put it this way. I felt physically drained and physically, attached to what had actually happened. That I know it wasn't a dream. I mean, I was actually taken somewhere.
You said they showed you what they wanted you to see. Do you think there's a difference between showing you the truth and showing you what you they wanted you to see?
I think what they showed me may very well be truth as far as the history of man and alien interaction. They seemed very, very intent on me knowing that the certain civilizations rose because of their involvement, and particularly the Eastern Mediterranean, the Mesopotamian areas, and the Egyptians were a result of their intervention.
And so they kind of lift their blessing or their hand off of nations and cultures, and therefore they go away.
In my book, Alien Disclosure, in the beginning of the book, I do explain some of what had happened to me and what they showed me and what they basically chronicled to me. In fact, they did show me what they said was the origin of monotheism and Moses and the Egyptian royal family. And I thought it was quite profound, though that theory has also been espoused by others, including Sigmund Freud. So it's not something that I read into a lot before I was shown this, but since that time, I've looked back at it, and it's I don't know if these other individuals were shown the same thing, but it's pretty close.
Now, did they just want to impart wisdom to you, or did they want something from you?
I don't know. I don't know. That I do not know.
Yeah, you have no gut reaction to that?
Not really. I thought it was remarkable that they showed it to me. And it's kind of along the same line of what's been going on with David. They just seem to put things out there and for his consumption, and they really don't leave any type of direction as to what's been going, what they believe it is. I guess they kind of leave it up to your interpretation.
Right. I mean, it's kind of like sensationalism, journalism at its worst. It's just like they drop this bombshell on you, either subconsciously or literally. And what are you to do with it, because it sounds so outrageous to some, and you're kind of just stuck with it.
Well, I can kind of give you a little idea of what they did show me. In particular, I have been trained as a remote viewer, and I have been involved with this type of investigation for many years now. I have used it for a lot of different things, but I've also worked with other remote viewers as well. And in this one particular time when I was shown, and this wasn't during a session or anything else. I don't know if by being a remote viewer, I was imparted with this for some reason. I had another remote viewer tell me that may be the reason why I was picked, as apart from being, someone chronicling David's story. But there was a historical scenario displayed to me, and when I was standing there and watching, I don't know what I was looking at on a screen, or it was just something that was placed in front of me. And I saw a colossal disc-shaped craft that would descend and land in an area which was shown to be, because it was kind of like a huge map as well, the area of the present-day Nile River Delta. Now, at that time, that particular location was completely encircled by the Mediterranean. And this craft later transformed into a massive island. And the inference to me was that this was the genesis of a great empire. Now, they didn't give me a timeline. I kind of got the sense that this occurred, I'd say, anywhere from 14 to 12,000 years ago. And, that's just what I had picked up unconsciously, and later, was able to write down when I started trying to write down what happened. Now, I don't think that particular incident was the first interchange it may have been the most influential, but I'm quite sure they've been involved with the human species on other times. But anyway, the rulers of this empire were the occupants of the craft that landed. From what I could tell, their knowledge was disseminated throughout the region, and their bloodline was merged with the native people as well. Now, these aliens or ETs or whatever you want to call them communicated to me that this empire was the nexus of several dominant and lesser civilizations in that part of the world. And I did ask them, was this Atlantis? But I never received a response to that question, which I found to be interesting. I witnessed other representations of various cultures over that period, and some were brief glimpses of, and others were mighty empires. But there was always a direct connection to the occupants of the craft that turned into this island empire. There was a particular emphasis on the development of the ancient Egyptians. And basically, I observed order created out of chaos, a civilization that was deeply influenced by the beliefs of these extraterrestrials. And for thousands of years, there was continued intervention by these alien gods. And I think, I don't know if it still happens now to some degree, but I think during the entire period of the ancient Egyptians, I think there has been intervention. And in fact, I was presented with a particular series of events that occurred during Egypt's 18th dynasty. Now, this has been classified as the first dynasty of the New Kingdom of Egypt. And it's also a time when Egypt achieved its peak of power. What they showed me was a profound encounter that occurred during the reign of Amenhotep III, which greatly affected the royal family and the priesthood. This encounter was interpreted by Amenhotep III as a divine message that the pharaoh was a god that rivaled Amun-Ra in the priesthood. Now, Amenhotep III's display of power and disdain for the priesthood was watched closely by his son, Amenhotep, who later changed his name to Akhenaten. And when Akhenaten became pharaoh, he established the quasi-monotheistic belief in the solar deity Aten, which I believe was a representation of an alien craft or an alien itself. And but it's also my belief, and I get a lot of arguing about this from a lot of people, but that his brother, the Prince Thutmose, who was earlier banished into the Eastern Desert for unknown reasons, later returned to Egypt during the early 19th dynasty as the Hebrew prophet Moses. Mm-hmm. And that was what was shown to me. Now, there was some interpretation, but from everything that I remembered from what I saw and going into the history of the dynasties, this is what I determined what they were trying to tell me. Mm-hmm. So, I put it in there for people to give me, get their own observations and conclusions. But, why they showed me that, are they trying to change the history? When you start getting into religions and the Bible and other associations, and and there's another thing too. These beings, and this is something David also told me, because he has discussed it with the original reptilian who was part of his original encounters and abduction, that they do, and I'm talking about all these species of non-terrestrials, they do actually believe in a supreme being. Now, is it God or is it something else? I don't know. But they seem to be very reverent to it.
Right. I spoke to an abductee, and she was saying that there is a phrase amongst the Greys that they impart to humans. And I'm going to butcher the phrase, but maybe you can help me with this. The phrase is something to the effect of, when you ask a Grey who they are or where they're from, they say something to the effect of, we are from the one who creates us all, or something to that effect, referring to a godlike creator.
Yeah. I was pretty blown away by that when I first heard about it, when David told me about it. But then when, it was kind of presented to me as well. It kind of made some sense. Now, who this or what this deity is it just an energy of some type? Is it what we interpret as God? People that do believe that there is a God. I'm not a very religious person, but it is quite interesting that they do truly recognize a supreme being.
Well, they've at least imparted a God part of our brain, because it's very difficult for my conscious mind to look at all this randomness and say, chance over time has created magic. It seems so much like the blind clockmaker, has eyes. So I was going to ask you if you ever heard of the work of Sean Mooney. He's a guy out of Eastern Washington, I believe, that's working on ancient Egyptian artifacts over here in the Pacific Northwest, including a large pyramid called Tum Tum Mountain.
I've heard about it. I'm not very familiar with his research, but I have heard about it. But that happens a lot. There are artifacts that just show up where they shouldn't be all the time, and some of the age that is associated with these artifacts is just unfathomable. There's more going on this planet than people realize, and it goes back way further than we realize as well.
Right. Well, and it always, and I shouldn't say always, but sometimes the Smithsonian seems like fingers are always pointed to the black vault in the basement of the Smithsonian. Have you found anything to confirm the Smithsonian is a part of, carrying off some of this evidence?
I think it's possible. There have been talk about for years that the Smithsonian has been a part of the Bigfoot legend and hiding evidence of the Bigfoot legend, and that they did possess a body or two at some point. I hear a lot of things about that. In particular, the Minnesota Iceman. There just seemed to be a connection with that thing, where it was actually really found out. There's a story that this being was actually killed by a Russian explorer in Northern California in the early 1800s, and that the Smithsonian ended up with this thing at some point. So I don't know, I don't know, but you do hear a lot of stories about the Smithsonian, and in particular just the government itself being involved with these type of phenomena, and just holding back on letting any of this out. And it goes back to the old conspiracy theories of what we know or what we should know, and I guess I guess some people would really like disclosure. I don't know if I really do. I think when there is true disclosure, it'll be when it needs to be, and it may be too late at that point.
Right. We'll be doing podcast on lawnmowers if that's the case.
Yeah.
Yeah, getting back to the Smithsonian, one of the conversations I remember having with three-time world champion taxidermist out of Canada was Ken Walker. Had a stint as a curator of sorts. I think he was working on a taxidermy piece at the Smithsonian.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that the Smithsonian did have interesting artifacts. One of the things that he mentioned was that there was a... I guess we'd call it a bear from the Ice Age that was shot in Alaska. And it's a bear that shouldn't exist. I don't remember what kind of bear it was, but he got to see the bones of it. I think he actually got to see more than the bones. Yeah. And, this was something that was roaming around in the 20th century. So to confirm the things about Sasquatch, just can't do that yet. But, the Sasquatch stuff is kind of our bread and butter here on the show. It was the foundation for why the show was even started. So getting back to Bigfoot, the most recent thing going around, of course, and maybe you've seen it, is this Bigfoot image of the window peeker. You've seen this image, have you?
Yeah. I don't know what to make of that thing.
Yeah, well, I just had some news pass by my desk while you and I were talking regarding this here, and it was from Steve Coles, who goes by the pseudonym Squatch Detective. Have you heard of this guy?
Yeah, I know Steve personally.
Okay, so he's done his due diligence on this case there, and he's written an article, Peekaboo Bigfoot is a Hoax, and he's come up with quite the profile on this guy along the way, and so I thought that was pretty compelling image, but yet not video. You can see the pinks of the eye. You can see a flexibility of what looked like the nose. So I don't know. It seems like Steve has made up his mind.
Bigfoot hoaxing is going to be something that's going to continue. There used to be a time when I would look at some of these videos and photographs from people who put them on YouTube and such. Now I have had some interesting photographs sent to me over the years, and for the most part, I think people were very sincere about what they showed me, and I do believe some of these very well may have been real. That particular photograph of this thing looking through the window, we looked over and talked about it within our group, and I have a pretty decent sized group of Bigfoot investigators in there, and I think for the most part, most of them thought it was a hoax. It just didn't look right to me.
I think some of the things that Steve is citing here is basically real estate deals that didn't happen that were mentioned in the report, and police record of sorts, a rather seedy police record of sorts on this individual. So Steve's pulling up police records on you, hoaxers. You best have all your ducks in a row.
He's done it before. The Georgia Bigfoot fiasco that occurred, I even forget what year that was now, but Dyer and his other partner down in Georgia who got involved with Tom Piscardi and the Bigfoot in the freezer and all that. Right. Steve was actually involved with that from the beginning, and why he turned tail and actually became, actually turned away from that and then started coming forward with what really happened. I don't know what the full story is there. I've heard a lot of speculation, but ever since that particular incident, he has had a knack for going out and finding information on these people that present this type of so-called evidence. So, I think he very well may maybe telling the truth about this individual. He, like I said, he's done in the past.
Well, there seems to be this ongoing game that happens where people have legitimate Bigfoot activity. I call them extended experiencers in particular. Not so much them, but people that have an initial sighting and they kind of chase the dragon and they feel like, maybe if I just hoax a little bit, I can get myself back out there. Have you ran in that too with things like with the flying humanoids? Yeah.
Yeah, it happens a lot. I think people believe that when they see something that they've been chosen somehow to present it to the world, and then they start going a little bit overboard, and I have seen that
You're
happen.
being kind.
I have seen that happen many times.
Yeah.
I think most hoaxers have had some type of unexplained encounter that they feel they need to expound on. And to be able to have people believe that, they can, they keep going a little bit further to where they're manufacturing evidence and such. I've had people say that about me. Well, you got involved with this, this Sykesville monster thing, and then they did a TV show about it and all that, and you still talk about it. Well, I mean, yeah, that's true, but I'm not changing the story and I'm not adding to it. So, it happened. I mean, you want to believe me, you can. If you don't, that's the way it goes. But no, there are people that they do seem to be adding layers to what had originally happened to them at some point. And it just gets, to where it's almost cartoon-like.
Now, in the documentary Hellier Part 2, they go down the rabbit hole of Pan. They end up with, a hooved god of sorts, Cernunnos. And I've seen that in my research as well, that it kind of crosses borders with a goat entity of some kind. Have you found that at all?
Not necessarily. I haven't watched the series. I some of my colleagues they've commented on it, so I don't know. I mean, the whole paranormal, and I'm talking about involving cryptids and UFOs, aliens, spiritual activity. There is a connection. I mean, there really is. I mean, there are many times when you will be investigating something and something else kind of gets involved with it. Another genre of the paranormal. I truly believe there are connections. In particular, just like the Bigfoot phenomena, there have been many times when people would say they had a sighting, and an investigator would go to the location, even a couple days later, and see orb phenomena, see lights, see a lot of strange things. Is it a connection, Bigfoot connection with UFOs and aliens, or is there something else involved there? I think a lot of the cryptids that people talk about and investigate are connected with other genres of the paranormal. It's just a matter of going out there and figuring out what it is. I believe that most cryptids or some type of manifestation of a corporal being that come from another reality. There are times when people would see a Bigfoot, follow it, and then the thing would just suddenly disappear like in thin air. I have had 2 witnesses of these winged humanoids who had the same thing happen to them. They'd watch it flying and right in front of them, it would just disappear like it went through an invisible doorway. You mentioned the Glimmer Man, or the phenomena that's closely related to what happened in the Predator movies. That's just heady stuff. I mean, are these cryptids able to? Are there cryptids or other beings that are able to camouflage themselves or somehow distort themselves to the point where you can't see them anymore or barely see them. It's I think there are a lot of different connections, and I think most investigators, if they do want to get down to what is actually going on, are going to have to be open-minded enough to believe that there is a connection and just not stick to one phenomenon.
Well, now people on your research team, these members, are they kind of required to think one way about the phenomena as far as it being so fanned out and unusual, so hot, supernaturally charged? Are they all on board with that, or do you have, flesh and blood scientists looking for footprints and grabbing hairs?
I have this is an eclectic group. This really is. If you go to my website and look on the right-hand side, I have the Fans of Monsters 14 research link, and you click on there and each one of them will come up, and their backgrounds are varied. I don't require anybody to believe in any specific type of theory or phenomena when it comes to the paranormal. And, I'm open to about everything, and after all these years, I believe that any investigator or researcher needs to be more open-minded about investigating this phenomena, because there's just no simple answer to it. But, we do get along, and we do bounce things off each other. Mm-hmm. And I think that makes for good research.
Well, let's give that number out. So if people have a report and they want to file it, you've got a number here. Why don't you give the number out?
Yeah, you can call me at 410-241-5974. Or you can contact me by email at lonstrickler@phantomsandmonsters.com.
All right. And again, Phantom and Monsters, you can check it out, phantomandmonsters.com, and Arcane Radio. Lon, thanks for talking to me.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, the great Lon Strickler. Again, the podcast, Arcane Radio, the website, Phantoms and Monsters, and, of course, the book, Flying Humanoids. You can find those all under the name Lon Strickler. All right, as I was saying, you want to check out strangebräuradio.com. Go to the tab that says Quarantine Webinars, and there you will see your ability to sign up for 2 different lectures, I want to say, webinars or classes or meetups, hangouts. They're more than a hangout. And again, that's the 18th and 19th of April. Marcia K. Moore, Brien Foerster. That would be the conversation on the mystery of the elongated skulls. Truly fascinating. And there is anatomical evidence that these were real people, not head binding. They are anatomically way different than us. And they'll go over some of those trademarks, as well as talking about some of this ancient tech all around the world and the markers of the elongated skulls being all the way up here in Pacific Northwest in America. So that's news, right? If you listen to the previous conversation we had about the ancient pyramids at Tum Tum Mountain, you would have a little bit of an idea of just how hidden the real history is. You remember the victors write the history books, don't they? So that's coming up again on the 18th. And then, of course, on the 19th, Ron Morehead and Scott Nelson, Crypto-Linguist professor, language professor Scott Nelson, who rarely does long, extensive 3-hour discussions about this, but has much to discuss, and it is getting very weird, the things they're discussing. Ron Morehead as well. So you have to have a ticket. Go to strangebräuradio.com, go to the quarantine webinars, and order those tickets now through Zoom. Again, the Mystery of the Elongated Skulls is a suggested donation to Marcia K. Moore's PayPal account. Her link on that is written down as well. So, but as of now, the tickets for the Ron Morehead Quantum Bigfoot Language is what we have it titled under, is going for $6.99. All right, so thank you again for checking that out. Also, thank you for being a part of the show. This is pretty unprecedented times, and you could be doing a lot of other things. I spent the better part of the last 2 days designing, blueprinting, digging, and slowly building a log jam waterfall feature in the backyard near the evergreen cedar porthole that I made. Portal. I always say porthole. Those are my old Navy days. So, things around here are getting kind of crafty at this point. I don't know if you're getting crafty yourself, but I don't know, pick up a glue gun or a shovel and have some fun while you're in quarantine. Also at the patreon.com/Strange Bräu Radio, I'll be putting the Skinwalker Ranch conversation with Bigfoot author Tom Powell and Colonel John B. Alexander, only at patreon.com/Strange Bräu Radio. Plugged away. Okay, see you next week, and if not sooner, I will see you in the trees.